people who care. So hello, we are here today at the Outreach Teen and Family Services office with two incredible guests, or not guests, but people, I should say. Madeline, do you want to kind of start us off?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Madeline. I'm one of the podcast hosts that you hear from me, whenever the podcast episodes come out. I'm here today with Maggie and my mom, Kelly Gyurina. But yeah, just to give you a little bit of backstory about me. As you know, I'm one of the podcast hosts, a part of the YAC, and actually I'm going to be this is going to be hard because I won't get to be on the podcast for a little bit, but I will be traveling to Spain pretty soon, so that's really exciting. And this kind of relates to our topic today, anxiety. Part of the reason why, it's like a Spain abroad program, and some of the things I had to take into consideration for choosing this program were based around my anxiety and what I knew was going to work and be best for me, and what wasn't going to work and wasn't going to be best for me. So, I'm really looking forward to today's episode and getting into this a little bit more with my mom. I think my mom and I have a very unique relationship because of, what both of us can bring to the table and talk about. So hopefully this episode is really helpful for you all today. So I'm going to take it from here, Mom. You introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I'm Kelly Gyurina. I'm Madeline's mom. Super proud. And I am mother of three. Madeline is my oldest. I have a daughter who is 17 and a son who is 15. And prior to, I'm a stay-at-home mom. Prior to that, I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with an undergraduate degree in biology and a graduate degree in exercise physiology. So I used to work in research, and then when I had Madeline, I chose to stay home with my 3 kiddos. So that's what I've been doing for the past almost 20 years. And recently, well, not so much recently, but I think I've always kind of had this really big interest and kind of a passion for all things mental health, having been someone who I believe has had anxiety for as far back as I can remember. Mm-hmm. And we can talk a little bit about that when we move forward. But so I'm happy to be here, happy to talk about it. I think the talking about it and conversation is where we get somewhere with this whole thing with mental health. So thank you for inviting me. Madeline, thank you for sharing your podcast space with me. And I'm ready.
Yes. Well, let's get started and let's do some fast 5 questions, this or that. So let's see. Audiobook or ebook?
Probably audiobook.
Okay, so Madeline, audiobook.
I gotta go ebook.
You never read ebooks. What are you talking about?
I never do audiobooks either because I'd rather have a book. But audiobooks, I can't pay attention enough. I always feel like I have to go back and rewind something. And if I do an audiobook, it's in the car, and then I'm not paying attention to exits and things like that. So
this is true.
For that, I have to say ebook.
You witnessed this?
I have. I've witnessed her getting distracted by something and missing her exits. Yes. Not to throw you under the bus here, but that's I've seen that. This is true.
I think, Kelly, I agree. I wish book, like the regular book, was an option here, but I think I would go ebook as well. I listened to one audiobook in my life, and it was training for a half marathon, and doesn't bring back the best memories. That was very challenging. Overall good experience, but training for something like that takes a lot of time and effort. So I think ebook would be where I go. All right, next one. Ninjas or pirates? What are you feeling?
Pirates. Solely because of Pirates of the Caribbean. I love those movies.
I knew you were going to say that.
You knew I was going to say that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She knows me so well.
She does.
I'm going to go ninjas because I feel like there's this really big sort of mysterious part about a ninja. There's like a sneakiness or a surprise factor, like, and I think just their skill.
Yeah. When I read this one, I don't know, I just was feeling pirates.
These are hard for me, Maggie.
Yes, these are hard. I think I've always loved the ocean and the idea that there's all these different islands, and I've always wanted to be like a pirate for Halloween, and I never have been. So maybe I'm feeling very inspired right now. There's still time. That's right. Okay, let's do a couple more. Stuffed crust pizza or normal cheese pizza?
Normal cheese, for sure.
Normal cheese.
Yeah.
I would go normal cheese as well, but vegan cheese. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do a fantasy or drama. This or that.
Fantasy.
Yep. Drama.
Drama.
Love a drama. Yes.
Drama. Drama.
Yep.
All right. And last but not least, okay, really listen to this one.
Okay.
Ability to travel without a passport or ability to read minds?
Well, I'd be tempted to say the first one, given where we are right now.
Yeah.
We're going to drive to Buffalo on Monday to get our passport, which is going to be so fun and exciting for us. But
Did you have to get it like expedited or something?
It was
It's not come yet, so now we have to go get it.
We're going to Buffalo. But here's the thing. If I could choose, if it was like a thing where I couldn't choose and I just had people's voices echoing in my head, I wouldn't want that. But if I could turn it on and off, then I would want the ability to read minds.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
because then I have a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, like, sometimes, maybe you get a look from someone and you're like, I feel like that was towards me. They don't like something about me. But then everyone's like, well, you can't prove that. They could have just been like doing something. But then you can prove it if you can if you can read minds.
You'd have evidence.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
That's a hard.
You've persuaded me, Madeline. I think I was first thinking travel anywhere without a passport. Don't have to worry about that important document. But now with this whole...
I would agree with that too, Maggie. So I'm going to do the same as Maddie for that reason. That's a very good point.
It could be really damaging for you.
It
could be really damaging, but I'm going to choose that option anyway.
Well, I already read Dad's mind all the time. But at least I think I do.
Oh my gosh.
Should we bring him on the next podcast?
That would be interesting.
Oh, that would be so interesting.
That's a whole other level.
Oh my God.
Oh, that was fun. Well, we would like to pause and thank St. Clair Health for being our annual sponsor.
At St. Clair Health, we're always improving, building on our commitment to face the challenges of today, making an impact on the communities we serve, so we can be stronger together. St. Clair Health, expert care from people who care.
Okay, so today's episode is really going to just be about my mom and I and our different experiences with anxiety and how that's affected our family, our relationship, and kind of diving deep into all those things. So is there something you want to start out talking about, or maybe your experiences?
Sure. Okay, so I would say it's been an interesting journey because my anxiety went undiagnosed for quite some time. And I don't think I realized that the beginnings of I ended up having a diagnosed eating disorder right around Madeline's age, maybe 18 years old. And that was after a very long battle with anxiety, which I didn't recognize until well into treatment. So I think that, I think so many people have anxiety, and we always talk about how it's normal, like having a certain amount of anxiety is normal because you have to get out of a dangerous situation, so it comes in handy. But when anxiety is there all the time and it's kind of inescapable and you really feel like you don't have the skills to cope with it, then it can turn into, more worse things. So I think that as an adult, I've really learned, number one, how to manage my anxiety. It took me a really long time. There's so many complications for that too. Like I've learned recently more about inherited family trauma. any kind of childhood trauma that might have exacerbated my anxiety, which is I think what happened in my case. I was always a worrier. I talk about that all the time. I remember worrying as a kid, and I had a list of worries, and if I didn't have something on my list, I was worried that I didn't have a list of worries. So I was always worried. And I remember when Madeline was young, I remember some things that she would do or say that reminded me a lot of myself at that age, like perfectionistic traits with homework, or, she got a 99 on a test and it was like anxiety producing because she felt like she should have gotten 100. And so all of these like things that were almost like, when that's part of your personality and your makeup, you there's nothing you can do to get rid of that. That's kind of how you're built. That's how you're wired. So I think that in recent years, I've really tried to understand that, to help my kids. I think that I do believe that there is a genetic component to anxiety as well. So I think Madeline and my other daughter Charlie come by it naturally, but getting them, involving therapy early and early intervention and trying to learn coping mechanisms to help with anxiety was kind of how I took on the role, being her mom, with the hope that she would learn the coping mechanisms that she needed going into adulthood. So that's kind of been my early experience. How about you? What would you say your early experience? How far back do you remember having anxiety?
Definitely really, really far back. I think I've talked about it some on this podcast. So it's interesting because I think a lot of my early anxiety especially was tied to my mom. Because my mom and I were so close. Growing up, I felt like I couldn't make my own choices because I didn't want them to be the wrong choice. And the right choice was whatever my mom thought. Because when I was younger, I viewed her as literally like as perfect. Like her opinion was the opinion. It was the right answer. So when my guess or my thought or my opinion didn't match with that, I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment in myself. And I think that was really hard and tied in a lot with my OCD and everything else that I had going on. But I think that's kind of more of a unique thing between me and my mom, that like I think we've grown up so closely twined that it can be hard to, it was definitely hard for me to separate myself and make sure we were living our own lives and had our own experiences. And I still feel the need, like my mom is a very comforting presence for me. Growing up, she was very helpful with my anxiety. She was like my one constant support system. Like I had others, but they came and went. But my mom was my one source, like at home, who I could really rely on, because she had firsthand experience. So,
Can I say something here real quick?
Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
Interesting. You bring up a very good point, and I'm glad you said this, because I think when you have anxiety and then you have a child that has anxiety, you assume that their anxiety is the same as your anxiety. And when hers started, and particularly I would say the transition to middle school, I remember much of my experience of Madeline was an assumption of, I know how you feel. I remember always saying that to you. And I remember there was a point at which Madeline started verbalizing, and I was so happy that she was doing it. She would say, "Mom, I think you understood before, but you don't understand anymore." So her anxiety was definitely her own. It revolved around different things than my own anxiety. But when you have a shared experience like that, and as a mom, and you want to fix it, so your go-to is, well, how would I have, now having more information because I'm older, how would I address this now? But I'm not a trained therapist. I'm not in Madeline's head. So there was definitely a point where my understanding of her anxiety, we sort of like, there was a fork in the road, and I was going in one direction and she was going in the other. So thank you for saying that, because I think that's important to say, because there was never any malintent on my part. I was just trying to help. But at some point she was finally able to verbalize, like, that's not my experience.
Mhm.
Mine is
Yeah.
different from that.
Mhm.
Right. And it was really terrifying because in the earlier years when I was able to say what was going on, and my mom would respond with something that could only have come out of my head, it was like, oh, thank God. Like, I felt so safe and so like comforted,
Understood.
understood all of those things. But then as soon as that went away, I was flailing again. Like, I didn't have my rock. I felt like, my mom was my rock. And so when I kind of started having different anxieties, that was really when it was like, okay, am I just this, like, what's wrong with me? Because if I could relate to my mom, then I wasn't so unique. Other people were going through it. But, when I felt like I lost my constant support system, it was like a whole other thing to tackle that really, really changed things.
Makes sense, and probably
Yeah.
evoked more anxiety
Right.
because now there was this sense of like maybe abandonment. Like, now I am alone because I feel like I've lost that. I'm not holding on to that rock anymore.
Right.
Do you remember around like what age that was for you or grade?
Maybe it was like late middle school. Do you remember?
Yeah, I would have said
Because I remember being in my bed and telling you. Like, I remember
it was
the
either
moment.
late middle school or early high school. It was
Yeah.
one or the other.
Like, I just straight up said it.
Yeah.
I was like, I like, you used to understand, but I feel like you don't anymore. And it was like, it was just awful because there was always such a strong understanding between us, and that's what has made our relationship so strong. And we even there are times too when like my other siblings like poke fun at us because it's like, oh, like, she's the favorite child, but really it's just I was her firstborn, and I grew up feeling some of the same things she did, and I think you can bond over that, but
For sure.
it was just definitely tricky too. And I think another thing that's been like a more recent thing is like I'm getting older now. Like, I'm an adult, and I think when you have the relationship that my mom and I have, that of course more recently has gone through its ups and downs because I've been more verbal about my opinion. It can be, I always encourage my mom to like to focus on herself and her anxiety. I think she's such a caring person that she has said this, but I know it goes beyond words. Like, she would do anything for her kids. And I always, like, I try to remind her, like, I'm hurting right now, but I'm going to be okay. Like, I want you to focus on yourself, because I think there was a lot of time where you weren't. And that's just as important as me being okay as you being okay as well. So I think that's a really important point to understand, that if any moms, parents, guardians, whatever out there are listening, you can help your kids the best by helping yourself. It's like when you're on the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others. So you have the resources and the tools and the stability, the emotional, mental stability to give without depleting yourself, to fill other people's buckets without depleting your own bucket. You have so much to give that, helping others isn't going to drain you. And I think that point in itself has been so important the past couple years. So I would definitely want to mention that as something to focus on.
I completely agree with you. I think too, and it's like, you are such a good prompter for like things in my brain that I think are so important to say, because I think what I would also say to other moms, parents, caregivers is, you bring a whole lifetime of stuff with you to a marriage, to a relationship, to a family. And in my case, I had some trauma in my childhood, and my circumstances went from, being in this 4 kids, 2 parents family to being in a 1-parent home that was very chaotic, to say the least, and some other things too. And those important adolescent and teen years, I didn't have anybody really there.
Mm-hmm.
And so my response to that in having children was to go in the other direction and overdo things. And I think that's part of it too. Like, I didn't have anybody helping me. Nobody said to me, Kelly, I see that you're really anxious, or like, what's going on? Let's get some help. I didn't have anybody doing that. And soon I was knee deep in an eating disorder, and I was starving myself, and still nobody was helping. So when those signs came, and when you have a child that's verbalizing, I need help, like the worry was just overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Of course you're going to go toward that and get help. But I think it's important too, in those moments when that's happening with Madeline in the early stages, I wasn't even thinking about myself,
Mm-hmm.
what I was bringing to being a mom, what I was bringing from my inner, the hurts that I had,
and hurts,
and
yeah.
how that was affecting, because it had to feel almost suffocating in some situations, because it was like I would wake up in the morning like, how am I going to help? 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 And I, I've got a home to take care of, and groceries to buy. And I was always volunteering, with school and all these other things. So, but it can become consuming,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because I didn't want to do it wrong. And I felt in my eyes doing it wrong would be not addressing it. So I almost overcompensated.
Yes.
So I think that's an important point to make, to your point, Maddie.
I want to really keep this conversation going. I want to pause though really fast and thank St. Clair Health for their generosity in sponsoring the first season, actually the second season of Teens Tap
Second
In.
season. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
At St. Clair Health, we're always improving, building on our commitment to face the challenges of today, making an impact on the communities we serve so we can be stronger together by creating reliable resources that recognize all of our neighbors, with access to the highest quality healthcare, advanced care close to home, and a shared humanity that delivers on our joint vision to create a healthier community for all. St. Clair Health, expert care from people who care.
Yeah, I think, oh gosh, I don't know. I think, like with everything, there are pros and cons. And I think I've been thinking a lot about parenting, and how, like, honestly, like, no matter what you do, like, as a parent, you're trying to make the right decisions, the right choices for your kids, putting everything into account. You make a choice. Most likely your child will still grow up having trauma from their childhood. And that concept is so frustrating to me, because it's like you can put in everything and want the best, but there's still things that your child will grow up with that were not healthy or not productive, or not, whatever you want to call it. And that's so scary, because I don't know, like, just because I've learned a lot about your childhood. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't, like, I had a very happy childhood. I wouldn't say I had a childhood full of trauma or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I was lucky with that, because mm-hmm. I did have a very, of course we had our struggles. Like my sister and I, there was a lot of rockiness in our relationship, especially growing up. But overall it wasn't like my mom's childhood.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are happily married, and what was I going to say? Sometimes it just poof.
Yeah.
Which is very frustrating. But
you were talking about parenting and how.
Yes.
Yeah. Just that I think you were saying you think a lot about that, and what you like, whatever the experience of parenting is.
Yes, and how my mom was saying, like, oh, it must have been suffocating with how you approached it. Honestly, maybe once or twice in my whole life it was suffocating.
Yeah.
Once or twice,
mm-hmm.
tops. Like, I much rather would have had it the way it was than having it where I didn't have any support at all. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't doubt for a second that she cared. Like, I didn't doubt that, because she asked so much, and like, whenever I was upset, like you could see the distress on her face. Like she was all in all the time.
Well, I think too, once you go down that path, right? And I'm someone that's always going to address those issues because they're health issues, just like anything with your physical health. And I will say that until I'm in my deathbed. And once you address that, and you start with the pediatrician, and then the pediatrician might say, go take, starting to see a therapist might be helpful. And then that therapist might say, hey, you might want to try a medication. So you go down this pathway that you certainly don't plan that out yourself as a mom. You just take the next right step. And but I wasn't going to not address it or sweep it under the rug, and I remember it was in high school. I think that like the anxiety got really bad. It was there was like a lot of anxiety around writing papers, remember? And she would sit for hours and have to write a paper, and she's like, Mom, the thoughts, it's like you would describe it like I would, like there's like a ping pong match going on in your brain, and the thoughts are just bouncing off the walls of your brain, but you can't get them out on paper. And she's a very bright student and got amazing grades, but she worked, tirelessly because it was that hard because of the anxiety. So when that's what I say, yes, we all have a normal level of anxiety, and we understand that. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm saying, I do want to say, I understand that anxiety is normal, but when anxiety is so high and so profound that it's affecting you living a normal, healthy, happy life, that's when you have to address it.
Right.
And so I feel like that's where it's just it's different experiencing as a person with anxiety and then having the experience as a mom of a person with anxiety.
And I think something to mention too is the other side of that, because growing up, of course, I had my mom who was who could relate to a lot of what I was going through. My dad, on the other hand, can in some ways, but we always go back to this one example where I was in like elementary school, early elementary school, and every night my dad would want me to sit down with him and do these math flashcards, like what's 5 times 3, what's
Second
8
grade.
times 9, second grade.
I remember it.
And I remember, like, it would really stress me out because he would always want me to, like, okay, fast, accurate, like, what, go. Like, I'd think and I'd get, like, frozen, and he'd go. And it was so stressful. And I remember one night I finally just broke down crying. And the confusion on my dad's face, he was like, he could not possibly comprehend what was wrong. Like, he looked at me like I wasn't bleeding. Like, I was physically okay, but he just looked so, like, what? Like, what's going on? Like, he couldn't understand.
Well, because you had to do it timed. Remember, for a second grade, you had a timed
and time does not time tests. None of that was my jam.
That is stressful for me too.
Yeah.
So I sat there and I just remember breaking down, like, I can't do this, and it took. I think that was like the beginning point of when my dad like finally got a hold of like what was going on with me. But for a lot of my childhood growing up, he did not get it. And I think probably a lot of listeners out there could relate to that, to having a parental figure, whoever, whatever you want to call it, a support system that doesn't really understand what you're going through, that maybe they want to be supportive and they don't understand it. Maybe they're not supportive and they understand, like, whatever the situation is. I grew up with supportive parents, but I guess I didn't really understand growing up that I did have another supportive parent, but because he didn't get it. He didn't get it. He wanted to support me. He wanted to help, but he didn't get it. And I think he's gotten a lot better, which is he's taken the initiative to learn and to listen to me. And it's been great, and I've gotten lucky to have a parent like that who's willing to learn and to put all of that effort in. But sometimes things aren't that way, and there are unsupportive people in your life, and that can be really, really tricky as well.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think it's interesting too that, like, having 2 girls that have anxiety, their anxiety comes out in completely different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't even recognize when my younger daughter started struggling with anxiety, I didn't even recognize it. It didn't look like a typical experience of anxiety. And they are very different. Like, I mean, they're very different people too, which is wonderful, actually, because why would we all want to be the same? They each bring a lot to the table for sure in my family. But their experience of anxiety is so different. And that's interesting as a parent, and difficult too, because it's like what helps one doesn't help the other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also been, it's not all cookie cutter. So somebody's anxiety, and in my case, and I think in a lot of cases, anxiety is sort of the root of something. And then, like I always say, if you don't develop coping mechanisms to deal with the anxiety, then it can turn into something more serious. Like you start finding coping mechanisms that are not healthy, like restricting your diet or over shopping, or, God forbid, alcohol or drugs, or, so, that's why I think we were kind of adamant as parents to try to, get some help on board before they were older and, got, left and went out into the world. Like, but
Yeah.
it's certainly not the easier path, for sure.
But wanting to try to take that proactive, preventative approach than the reactive type of approach.
Yes.
As we wrap up today, I'm wondering if both of you could kind of speak to, like, Madeline being the teen voice. What do you think was and is helpful for adult figures to know when they are trying to help and support their child or loved one or student who is experiencing mental health? And then Kelly, the same question but kind of swapped. What do you think would be helpful?
Well, so this is so everything about really every topic ever. It's so like complex, and there's not one right answer for every kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what I would say is just sitting down with your kid and having an open and honest conversation, like being honest. Like if you don't understand what's going on, verbalize, I don't understand what's going on, but I want to be there to support you. Just being as honest as you can with your kid. I think as a parent, like you're not expected to know all. It's just not possible. It's not realistic. So I think, at least for me, I feel a lot of respect for my parents when they can be open and vulnerable about not knowing something and not having the right answer. Mm-hmm. And of course, like you sitting down and trying to have this conversation, if you're working with teens especially, you never know how that's going to end up because they might be crabby that day or whatever. But I honestly think that is the safest, most healthy solution. And if they don't want to talk about it, just giving them space and just saying, like, if you want to talk about it, I'm here. I think that's really, really valuable. And I think it will stick with most kids when you say that. So just letting them know that you're there as a resource and is the most important thing. And just being as honest as you can, because if you're not honest, that's not getting you anywhere. Like if you're trying to, especially in building a relationship with your kid, you both want to build a relationship with the real you, not with a fake version of you. So being honest, being open, and also remembering to give each other space too. Like teens, also remembering that your parents are humans. They're people too. They have their own struggles and their own stress and their own anxiety. I even have to remind myself, like, my mom, I can't expect my mom to be happy, cheery all the time. If she's having an off day, she's having an off day. So just remembering that maybe you want to talk about it and it's not their time to talk about it, that's okay. Respecting each other's space and coming together when you both feel ready. I think that's really important.
I think that was beautifully said. I'm going to agree and say, I think listening is key. And I still have to work at this, because as a parent, you do want to fix, you want to jump in and, but maybe you could try this. And Madeline has verbalized to me, like, Mom, sometimes I just want you to listen. And it's the hardest thing to do, but it's so important. I would also say, always tell your child that their mental health is just as important as their physical health, and that there's nothing wrong. You're not weird or strange or I always say this: if we can believe that something can go wrong with your lungs or your bones or your skin, then why can't we believe that something can go wrong with your brain, which is your most complex organ in your body? So it makes sense that people have struggles with, your brain controls your thoughts and your thoughts control your actions. And it all makes sense to me. So I think addressing that, honestly, is, there's nothing wrong with you that you need to go talk to somebody about the way you're thinking or feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally valid. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's what I would say.
I think both answers are just so incredibly real and honest, and I truly believe are going to help teens and families who listen. So thank
Hope
you
so.
both so
Yeah,
much.
of course. It was a pleasure to do it with Maddie.
Yes, yes. So lastly, this podcast would not be possible without the support of St. Clair Health. Please listen to the following ad.
At St. Clair Health, we're always improving, building on our commitment to face the challenges of today, making an impact on the communities we serve, so we can be stronger together. St. Clair Health, expert care from people who care.
Well, again, thank you so much for both being here today and having this really, like I just said, open and honest conversation about anxiety and how it can bond as well as interfere sometimes with relationships. And with that, I hope you both have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you
Thanks,
for coming
Maggie.
on.
Yeah, of course.
The views and opinions expressed in the Teens Tap In podcast represent the opinions of the hosts and their guests. The views and opinions expressed by Outreach Teen and Family Services employees, donors, and volunteers are their own and do not necessarily reflect the view of Outreach Teen and Family Services or the show's sponsors. The content here should not be taken as counseling advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each person is unique, please consult your mental health provider or physician for any mental health counseling or other medical questions. The podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including, but not limited to, establishing a standard of care in a legal sense, or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast. If you find any error in any of the content of the podcast, please contact us at podcasts@outreachteen.org. Outreach Teen and Family Services, its sponsors, donors, and partners expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages whatsoever arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, reliance on, or inability to use this podcast or the information presented in this podcast. Please go to www.outreachteen.org to see the complete notice and disclaimer for the podcast episodes.